Global Conservation Corps presents the Rhino Man Podcast. I'm John Jerko, your host, and one of the directors of Rhino Man the Movie. This podcast series is a way for me to interview top conservationists on the topics of rhinos, the poaching crisis, the importance of rangers, and community engagement, all as a way to create awareness around these issues and to promote the coming release of our documentary film. In this episode, I'm talking with Rohit Singh. Rohit is the lead for Zero Poaching at World Wildlife Fund. His current work helps advance WWF's priority wildlife conservation outcomes and helps reduce illegal and unsustainable wildlife exploitation and trade. Rohit works closely with WWF field offices, regional programs, global initiatives, and partners to support conservation law enforcement in protected and conserved areas through developing and implementing best practices and innovations. In this conversation, Rohit takes us on his journey from an early desire to work with wildlife up to his current work with rangers. We go deep into the Life on the Frontline survey, which reveals many of the challenges rangers face on the job around the world. Everything from low wages to lack of mental health support to poor training and gender inequalities. We talk about his work through WWF and the Universal Ranger Support Alliance to create better working standards and respect for the ranger position internationally. Rohit tells stories of some amazing rangers and leaves us with a beautiful quote from a fellow ranger. So much to learn about how we can all come together and support these amazing guardians of the planet. So let's jump in. All right, Rohit, welcome to the Rhino Man Podcast. Really appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks a lot, John.
Yeah, I think it was in 2019 at the Chitwan World Ranger Congress when I first met you in person, which seems so long ago, especially after the pandemic and everything that happened shortly after. But it's really great to have you on here and excited to really dig in on your knowledge on rangers. And maybe that's just a good way to start is, how did you become so passionate about rangers? Where did that all come from?
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm also thinking that actually just after World Ranger Congress, we went into pandemic mode. So yeah, it has been a long time since we met personally, face to face. Maybe let me take you back how I came into wildlife before I
Yeah, please.
start talking about ranger work. I come from this small town in northern India, and we used to visit our village pretty much every year on summer vacations. And this village had like all sort of animals. We had wild pigs, we had blue bulls, we had foxes, we had wolves actually, and I remember seeing pangolins in my village. So that's how my interaction with nature started in a way. And I didn't want to be in wildlife, but I know I wanted to be with animals, especially. So I wanted to be a veterinary doctor. I was not good enough in school, so I couldn't qualify the exam. So I said, okay, if I can't become a veterinary doctor, then I just come across a course on wildlife, and that's how I came into wildlife. My real interaction with rangers started, to be precise, in 2007 when I joined WWF in one of the landscapes in Cambodia, where I was spending 25 days a month with rangers. And that's where I learned a lot. I learned about the challenges rangers face. Learned about the teamwork. I learned about the passion of rangers, and I learned about the knowledge they have. Majority of our rangers were local villagers, and they knew where to find elephants. I remember that, they knew all the medicinal plants. So if you have a problem, because this place was so remote that to make a phone calls, you have to walk 8 hours, and they just knew everything. And so that's where my interaction with rangers started. And that's when I started learning about challenges of rangers. And yeah, maybe I can talk more about life on the front line later on, but that's where the journey with rangers started.
Yeah, that makes sense. And can you talk a little bit to what you were doing when you first started working with this rangers? What exactly was your role?
So we support this landscape. We support the law enforcement agencies with capacity building, etc. So I was there helping rangers with any trainings and advising them, working with them. And these rangers had lot of different roles. Of course, law enforcement was one part of their job, but they were dealing with, community education. They were dealing with habitat protection. They were they were helping local communities to protect their areas. They were helping, with schools and all sort of stuff they were doing. My role was to help them and to advise them and to work with them wherever possible. And I think the most important thing that I learned is this is a huge park. So we are roughly talking about the landscape we were working there is we are roughly talking about 7,000 square kilometer area, and we had around 100 ranges, and that's a huge area to manage. I'm like, now I live in Singapore, which is 765 square kilometer with 44,000 policemen. So it's a very different world. So
Yeah.
the country where I live is smaller than the section that of the park that where I first walked. So but the work they were doing was so diverse, and the knowledge, and I was just there to actually I feel that I learn more than what I could teach ranges.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that's a big reason of why I'm really excited to chat with you today is because, the film Rhino Man that we're working on focuses very heavily on the rhino poaching crisis in South Africa and what the rangers are doing from that perspective. But even those guys have, a diversity of roles that they play within the reserves and their communities. But even on a larger scale internationally, just kind of seeing what these men and women are doing around the world and learning more about that. So maybe before we dive into that though, in your opinion, why are rangers so important?
I think those two questions are related, John. I think when you cannot sort of fully understand the value of rangers unless you understand the wider role of rangers. And I coined this new term, which I really like. It's rangers are planetary health workers.
Mm.
And given the current pandemic situation, rangers do have an important role in stopping the pandemics or stopping the spread of the zoonotic disease. They are the first responders in many cases, and this we have learned during the pandemic time again, because many of these areas where rangers work, there are no medical facilities or there is no help available, and rangers are the first responders there, whether it is in the form of firefighters or helping during the floods. And of course they do protect biodiversity, which provide a lot of ecosystem services. So I think it is really important that we understand the role of rangers beyond protecting charismatic species. Yes, charismatic species is, or the protection of the species is one of their role, but they do a lot more than that. And this includes right from protecting the ecosystem services that we all depend on
Hmm.
to preventing zoonotic disease.
I feel like, especially for people that aren't super steeped in conservation and the different efforts, biodiversity is one of those words you hear a lot. And I think some people kind of get an idea of what it means, but especially in terms of rangers, I don't think people realize that connection. Because maybe you can dive into that a little bit more between rangers and actually protecting biodiversity, maybe even just describing a little bit more what biodiversity means for the planet.
Right. So I think the word biodiversity is, and I think it's in general, John. I think we need to be more innovative in conservation. I think we need to uh, communicate our conservation better. So biodiversity means any fauna and flora that we find, and the role of rangers in protection of biodiversity is, I think, is really crucial. And then I think one more point related to this, which we really need to understand well. I think there is a sort of a assumption that when we say ranger, we are only talking about a state ranger in uniform.
Hmm.
And that is actually it's a significant chunk of ranger workforce, but there is a lot more beyond it. There are a lot more rangers who are, community rangers, indigenous rangers. There are rangers who protect fisheries areas, oceans, and wetlands.
Hmm.
So I think when you start looking at the wider, when you sort of widen the definition of rangers, which it does, which the workforce is very diverse, but
Mm.
somehow only the state ranger in uniform, that part has been highlighted. And the role of rangers in protection of these places is super crucial. For example, you will not be able to protect these areas if you don't know what's going on in these areas. And
Mm-hmm.
who is going to provide that information is rangers. They are doing the monitoring of these sites. And without monitoring, you will not know whether the population is going down or population is increasing, etc. So rangers play that important role. And again, not as just a state player, but also as the diverse role rangers play. One example here is, which might be worth thinking of, is 36% of the rangers come from the nearby villages or within 20 kilometers of the park they are posted. So there is a huge connection between rangers playing the role in protection, but at the same time helping the local economy. And then I think that needs to be understood a bit better.
Maybe we can go into that even more. I mean, my perspective, honestly, is very connected to the South Africa situation just because of the film and my time spent there. And I don't really have a background in any of this stuff. I've just been learning so much over the last few years as I've taken on this project as a filmmaker. But talking about, in South Africa specifically, the Rangers play such a key role in community engagement as well. And, they all, like you said, most of these Rangers come from communities nearby or similar communities, not too far away. So just talking about that side of it and the community connection to a lot of these protected areas. I mean, it's a little bit different in every country, but I think there are some similarities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually this is something which I have learned in last 5 to 7 years, I would say, John. I started my career in Asia, but then I started sort of learning more about Africa and then Latin America, which I engaged in both the continent as well now. And initially I thought that it is very different, right?
Hmm.
But actually it's not. There are a lot of similarities in terms of the role rangers play, in terms of the challenges rangers are facing, in terms of this, challenges conservation is facing in general, whether you are in Amazon or you are in South Africa or you are in India. We are facing quite similar challenges. 75% of conservation is about dealing with people. It's about rest. 25% is rest, science, or whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
It's about dealing with politicians. It's about dealing with rangers. It's about dealing with villager whose cow has been killed by tigers. So it's all about dealing with people. So I see that common thread across all the continents. It does look different, but it's not very different in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to dive into some more of these roles, and I'm wondering if, for my brain, it might be easier to come at this from what are some of the issues or challenges that rangers face and kind of talk through those. So maybe you can even just give us like a broad overview of I think one that came to my mind was, there's the, what is it, 30 by 30 initiative where we're trying to protect 30% of the planet's land and sea. But, one of the problems that kind of become apparent, and even from my connection with South Africa, is that there's so few rangers for the amount of land and sea that we're trying to protect that it becomes a real problem to expect them to be able to cover that amount of space. So just like capacity building seems like a huge thing. Maybe you could kind of go through some of those challenges, and then we could talk through what needs to change or why those challenges exist, things like that.
Sure. So I think when it comes to challenges, I think one thing that has been missing from the range of work was sort of a strategic workforce reforms. We have looked at rangers from more sort of, okay, the guys need training or the guys need pair of boots. It has to go beyond it, because ultimately we are talking about reforming the ranger workforce, and that cannot happen until you really do policy reforms. And let me give you an example. Some of these challenges are like and then if I could take you a step back, in 2016, we, as WWF, we started thinking of, okay, how do we understand this workforce better? Because you can continue supporting ranger training forever, and training is a continuous process, or providing equipment support. But how do we understand this workforce better? Because the policies cannot be changed at site level. They have to be changed at provincial level or national level, and in some cases, even global level. So we started with a very simple survey in 2016, where we said, okay, we asked 10 simple questions to 500 rangers in each continent, asking them, do you have enough equipments? Do you want your kids to become a ranger? And what are the challenges do you face? Very simple question. They were not, the results were not shocking, but in a way, it quantified the problem for us. When a lot of the rangers said that they don't want their kids to become a ranger, which in a way shows that, they feel proud of their work, but they don't appreciate it enough. But you can't take 500 ranger surveys and go to the government saying, okay, yes, please reform your policies, because we have interviewed 500 rangers in a continent. So we said, okay, let's do it more scientifically at a bigger scale, so that can be used as a baseline for reforming it. And that's where the Life on the Frontline work started. It took 3 years. We interviewed 20% rangers in 28 countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Each ranger was asked 198 questions, ranging from, did you had malaria in last 12 months, to, is there corruption in your organization?
Mm-hmm.
And that provided us a real understanding of the workforce. What are the challenges they are facing in terms of welfare? What are the challenges they are facing in terms of health and safety? What are their motivation? What's their relationship with communities? What threats are they facing to their life? And that report, which was released at the Ninth World Ranger Congress at Chitwan in 2019, that sort of shows all the challenges. And it was an eye opener for, I think, a lot of people. Before, ranger challenges were not quantified in that manner. And I can never forget, and you were at the Congress, when International Labor Organization representative said, and I quote him, that the ranger working conditions are worse than sweatshop workers in China. That's what he said.
Yeah.
And after reading the report, uh, and if just to share some of these challenges, we all know that rangers work in difficult, sometimes dangerous working conditions.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have health insurance. They don't have life insurance. Many of the rangers are not even trained to do their job. Half of them are not trained to do their job. They never had the training when they started a job. Forget about the refresher training. Majority of the rangers don't have basic equipments. When I say basic equipments, I'm not talking about high-tech stuff. I'm talking about like boots, GPS, binoculars. Majority of the rangers do not have access to basic necessities like clean drinking water, toilets, or basic hygiene, and this results into them getting infectious disease. A lot of rangers had malaria. We have recently done the analysis where we have compared, are rangers more vulnerable to malaria in comparison to general population, and it shows really shocking results again. That rangers are in some countries 10 times more vulnerable to malaria, because they are in remote locations, and which is understandable, but we need to understand they don't have access to medical treatment. Also, a lot of the cases, the rangers feel that they are not recognized for their good work. And some of the interesting results from this work was, 80+% rangers said that they can't protect the park without the support of communities. So they said it clearly that we need community support, but at the same time, they also said that they've never been trained on it, how to deal with it. Majority of only 25% rangers had first aid training, which is a basic thing. If you are working in a remote area, you must know how to use first aid. Like that can save lives. So these are the challenges which we have recorded through life on the front line. And for past few years, we have been sharing it through different stakeholders at national level, government stakeholders, local stakeholders, and also through conservation organizations. And hopefully this will work as a baseline and we can work towards improving the working conditions, because ultimately it's all about labor rights now. We are not following our own labor laws when it comes to rangers. So how do we improve that? And I think policy work is so important on rangers, which has never been done. And to give you a simple example, UN has around 10,000 occupations listed in their list. And it includes anything that you could imagine in terms of occupation, from driver to nurses and to mining workers and blah blah. Rangers are listed under arts and entertainment.
It's interesting.
Along with circus workers.
Wow.
So you see that, in terms of, like, even in International Labor Organization, rangers are listed along with forestry workers, and forestry workers are mainly involved in logging and timber trade, etc. So I think the space that rangers deserve has not been there in the policy arena.
Can I interrupt you briefly?
Sure.
I guess I'm just curious, and maybe there's not even any real data on this, but why do you think rangers have kind of been neglected in this way, or second thoughts?
Yeah, I feel there are two reasons. One is, I think, the connection between the success or the failure of the area and it's with the ranger has not been established that well. So when you say, okay, rhino numbers are increasing, what's the role of rangers in that? It has not been established and communicated that well. And when I say connection, means beyond anti-poaching. I think we haven't been able to communicate rangers' role beyond the protection of charismatic species. And if we are not able to do that, then I don't think we can get into the conversation at policy level. And if I could just give you a simple example. Now, we know that rangers do not have access to clean drinking water and toilets. Now, that is the issue related to Ministry of Health. We can't talk to Ministry of Health because that was never documented. Like, you can't, because the rangers are employed with Ministry of Environment or Ministry of Forestry. So I think we haven't established that ranger, we haven't elevated the role of rangers so that to a level where you can sort of bring rangers into the bigger policy discussion. And I think it is, in a way, if I could say, a bit of an oversight of the conservation world. And I hope this will change going forward.
So do you see kind of your work now as being partially to kind of collect this data and information of how rangers impact these areas and then present that to these different labor organizations to say, hey, like, these people are integral to the success of these spaces. We need to take care of them better. What's kind of the process going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is why when we implemented the Life on the Frontline survey, we got inputs from International Labor Organization. Actually, International Labor Organization wrote the foreword for the report. So we are already in those sort of discussions. We are also working towards how do we connect rangers to the climate change narrative? What role do the rangers play in climate change? How do rangers help in achieving SDG goals? What role do rangers play in CBD or 30 by 30 framework? Because once you start connecting those dots, and again, it is about talking about the wider role rangers play beyond charismatic species. And if we can communicate that better, I think we'll be able to get into the discussions with the right people who can reform the policies that impact ranger working conditions. So ultimately, we would like to see better working conditions for rangers, but to do that, we need to be in the right room with the right people. And this reframing of narrative will allow us to do that.
Yeah. And maybe for people that don't know, why do rangers matter when it comes to climate change? Because I feel like that's probably the biggest topic environmentally that you hear about in the news.
Right? Like, how are you going to protect the climate change? To me, there can be a lot of other solutions, but to me, the best solution that nature gave us is to protect forest, to protect the natural places. And that's where rangers come in. They protect the natural places that's going to mitigate the climate change, whether it's Amazon, whether it's, evergreen forests of Southeast Asia. Also, I think another way to look at it, rangers are also sort of the first responders to climate change crisis in a way. And let me give you another practical example. In Sundarbans, which is a largest mangrove forest between India and Bangladesh, famous for its tigers, we have lost, I think, 10 or 12% of Sundarbans in last few years
Mm.
because of the increase in rise in sea level. That means less habitat for tigers, and more tigers are getting into human habitat. And that means more work for rangers in terms of catching these tigers and releasing them back into the wild. Or also, it's impacting the relationship between rangers and communities, because rangers are, it is always seen that rangers are supposed to prevent such incidents. So I think rangers are not only preventing the climate change, but also they are seeing the impact of climate change in a different way.
Yeah, it's kind of making their job harder
Yeah, yeah.
on top of all this. And yeah, I mean, just I like when you were talking about showing support for rangers as well. That's one part of this film. We want to actually be able to share this with rangers and say, hey, like, we recognize the work you're doing because, you put someone in the conditions you're talking about. I mean, even if you're well paid and have all of these benefits and support, it is a tough job in sometimes dangerous areas, and there are long deployments, and so to to have that along with all of these other potential issues and challenges, and then not even be able to connect with people on the outside that are saying, hey, we appreciate what you do. I feel like that's, yeah, it's a recipe for disillusionment, I guess, ultimately. But yet, even in some of these tough situations, I've seen just some amazing people that are dedicated to the work they're doing. But can you talk a little bit more about showing support for these rangers and how maybe people could do that in other ways that could be beneficial?
I think how people can support ranger work, I think it's for all of us is to create awareness around the ranger work. And I think when I say create awareness around the ranger work, I think it's about telling the human stories of rangers and the challenges they face. And when I say challenges, we need to communicate in the manner that the wider audience can relate to. And let me give you one example. Until what we have done it recently, but until very recently, actually, we didn't know how many ranges are there in the world. And if I say there are not enough rangers, it may not sort of resonate well with the general public, because they won't be able to understand, okay, there are not enough means how many are there, right?
Hmm.
I'm going to give you a comparison. I won't give you the exact number, but I can tell you there are more hairdressers in the UK than rangers in the world. Um,
It's pretty wild.
so and this number is going to be out very soon. And so I think we need to be more innovative on telling the ranger stories, because ultimately they are also they are human beings. They are looking for their basic rights. And think of when ranger is posted in a remote location, they have to keep their family somewhere else because they have to send their kids to school. That means they are not able to see their families for a long time. And now it's directly related with not having adequate number of rangers, which means you won't be able to visit your families as often that you want to. And some rangers actually don't see their families for months because they are in a remote location and they are working, long for months without break. So all these things are connected. I think the first step, if we want wider public to support ranger cause, is to communicate about the rangers in a language that people understand. And that can only happen when we reframe the ranger narrative. I call it sort of So the adventurous world of rangers, we have to
Mm.
move out from it, and then talk about the wider role of rangers. Not only about a guy jumping from a chopper and catching a rhino. That doesn't happen actually most of the time. It's about fixing a fence. It's about cleaning a water hole, or it's about chasing an elephant from the sugarcane farm, or it's about educating villagers, or it's about firefighting, or it's about helping the local communities. And we have seen this in during COVID time a lot. So I think when you start communicating about the wider role of rangers, then only you can get the support from the wider community, because then they will be able to understand this better. By doing, by talking only about the law enforcement side of it, I feel we are doing sort of a, we may get certain section of people to support it,
Hmm.
but we will miss out on the wider role, wider audience that we would like to get support from, and that is very crucial for reforming the policies.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And these Rangers have so much to offer in their stories. Do you have any stories that have touched you over the years in your experience working with these Rangers that kind of stick out as, an individual that's just kind of stood above and beyond the call of duty in whatever way that is, that might just connect with people?
Oh, there's so many, John. But let me share maybe two, and one is showing the challenge, and other is showing bit of the value of rangers. So I met this girl, and she's a ranger. I was doing a training in Western India for rangers in a tiger reserve, and she came to our training, the only female ranger in the whole lot of
Hmm.
whatever 50 rangers we had in that training camp. And this again shows gender issue within the ranger workforce. Only 3 to 11% rangers, we have only 3 to 11% female rangers. So she was very vocal, and I was super impressed, because then I started having a conversation with her, and this was long back in 2015, and since then I've been in touch with her, and I'm learning every day about her. So she comes from a very remote village and a very conservative family in Western India. She's the first girl to go to school, and she always wanted to be in police, but she couldn't qualify the exam, and she went into depression.
Mm.
Then she saw this job for forest guard, and she became forest guard. And she was first posted, when she got her first posting, she was assigned to office work, and she went literally on hunger strike. She said, "No, I want to be in the field." Then they put her at the ticket counter. They said, "Nope, I want to be in the field." And she went to the field, and she runs the whole you see her photos, like she's running, she's going to the villages rescuing crocodiles and snakes, and where you see 10 men standing there, and she's jumping on the back of the crocodile and catching. And now what I have seen in last 7 years, now she has become a inspiration for a lot of college girls and a lot of school girls and a lot of girls in her own village. Like, she's such an inspiring story. She was at the World Ranger Congress, and her thinking is, I feel, is way beyond what all of us think. When I think somebody asked at the World Ranger Congress, what can male rangers do for female rangers? And she has a one sentence answer: they treat us like you.
Mm.
And I think she is such an inspirational story, and I talk to her a lot. And these are the stories that really inspire. Another story is from Cambodia, where when I was working there, we were approached by local, we had a lot of village engagement program, and one of the families came, said, okay. And then this lady comes to me and said, okay, can you give my son a job, because he is alcoholic, and we want him to do something. And we gave him a job, and that was, in a way, was the only way to keep him away from the village where he drinks alcohol. And we posted in the remotest location, and he became our best elephant tracker. He just loved it. And then he became our ambassador to go back to the village and create awareness around rangers, around the conservation and biodiversity. So I'm like, there are just so many stories that I can go on and on. But they're so inspiring people. I'm like, they have done such a good job and they are doing such a good job. And we need to talk about these inspiring stories and give them platform where they can share their experience and their challenges themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those. And I feel the same, all of these rangers that I've met over the years, especially Anton Zimba, who we follow in the film, spent so many hours driving around the reserves with him. And just, I think on the outside too, I kind of saw them as more protection. I thought, they have some conservation understanding, but Anton, he's one of those people that just he knows every bird call. He can identify all the wildlife, the trees. He understands the way the soil interacts with different parts of the reserve. And I mean, it's just amazing the wealth of knowledge and passion for conservation and being out there in the bush. I mean, he loves being out there. I mean, he misses his family because he does do long deployments too. But for him, it's really a calling, and just to be able to share those types of stories and that passion that people have, and bring the respect that these jobs deserve. It's really awesome work that you guys are doing, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what the World Ranger Congress is. I know hopefully I'll get Chris Galliers on here from the International Ranger Federation, but maybe just briefly talk a little bit about what that event is about, and then maybe we can talk about some of your work that you've been doing with URSA and kind of pushing forward this action plan for rangers.
Sure. So, World Ranger Congress is an event hosted by the International Ranger Federation every 3 years. And the purpose of the Congress is to bring together the ranger community and talk about the challenges they are facing and highlight their needs. There has been 9 congresses until now, and the 10th Congress is next year. I was involved. I'm involved in International Ranger Federation as well because I'm their elected representative of Asia. So I was involved in the last Congress where the Chitwan Declaration came out, and the ninth World Ranger Congress, last Congress, was unique in many ways. First of all, it was the first ever Congress in Asia. It was the largest ever Congress in the history of IRF. We had 550 rangers from 70 countries. It was the first, it was the only Congress with 45% women representation. And it was the only Congress with 20% indigenous or community representation. So it was unique in many ways. And we had prime ministers to local community members attending the Congress. But what was also very unique about this Congress is a lot of the time what happens in such gatherings, not just rangers, but other gatherings as well, you sign documents and then you go back to your home countries and everybody forgets about it. In this Congress, when the Chitwan Declaration was signed by rangers asked conservation community to come together and develop an action plan to implement the needs that have been identified in the Chitwan Declaration. So that gave us the hook for or reason for all the conservation organizations to come together, and that's how the URSA started. So Universal Ranger Support Alliance is an alliance of 7 conservation organizations that work with IRF to implement the actions identified in the Chitwan Declaration. So it has a 5-year action plan, and it is the first ever alliance that is solely around professionalizing and building a responsible and representative ranger workforce. And if you look at the ranger, we have a clear action plan, what we need to do in the next 5 years. It is very holistic. That's what I really like about it, because it goes from equity and equality in the ranger workforce to the community relation to accountability to welfare. So it's a very holistic document, but at the same time, it's a very ambitious document. In 5 years, we are talking about reforming the workforce, which is not going to be easy, but I think it is the step in the right direction.
Hmm. Yeah, and it seems like it addresses a lot of these challenges that we were talking about just a little bit ago. Can you talk to any parts of that action plan that really connect with you, or that you're putting most of your energy behind personally?
Yeah, I'm like, to be honest, like I'm involved in quite a few work activities of the action plan, and everything's so exciting in there. But let me give you an example. So let's take training as an example. So we all have been training rangers. When I say we, means a lot of conservation organization, colleges, etc. But until today, there are no universal ranger competencies. What a competent ranger looks like.
Mm.
And URSA is trying to do that, but not by getting a few experts in a room, but actually asking rangers directly, what do you think you need? And I think that's the unique part of URSA. It came from rangers. It came from the needs identified by rangers. So that work is quite exciting. Also, we are looking into the first ever welfare standards for rangers. As per the International Labor Organization, decent work indicators. So what are the absolute minimum working conditions that every ranger should have access to? The Ranger Code of Conduct, the first ever code of conduct. I think that those were committed 20 years back, but and these code of conducts again going to make ranger workforce responsible and accountable. Because when you look, like if you look at from a bigger investment perspective, nobody is going to invest in a non-accountable workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to build an accountable ranger workforce, and that's where things like code of conduct comes in. We have done the first ever gender report on rangers. What are the challenges with regard to gender inequality within the ranger workforce? And those results are really concerning. And then this is again related to where we started our conversation. The way ranger have been communicated is sort of a macho man's world.
Mm-hmm.
That itself is a big obstacle for women to enter into the ranger workforce. That's why we see only 3 to 11% women. And that needs to be addressed, because you can't have there are a lot of things that you can't address that rangers have to deal with without having enough women in the ranger workforce. For example, community engagement. For example, there are cultural barriers in many areas where the male rangers can't go, and you need
Yeah.
to have female rangers.
Do you have any examples where someone's doing it right in terms of gender equality and having more women in the ranger workforce? Do any stand out to you, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, I'm like, it is sort of building up. Like, there are few examples. Akashingas are there in Zimbabwe, where International Anti-Poaching Foundation has done a really good work. Game Ranger International in Zambia, they do really good work on gender equality. But I feel we need to work at two levels. One is, of course, having a female ranger workforce. That's a good thing, but also ultimately you'd like to have the mixed ranger workforce. And to do that, we need to work at two levels. One is that we need to reform the policies, because in some places women are just not allowed to join the ranger workforce. And this is what we found out in our gender study. In some cases, there is an explicit mention that only men can apply for ranger job. So we need to reform the policies. Second is we need to look at the enabling conditions. If you're not able to provide decent accommodation, you're not able to provide access to toilets, you're not providing the enabling conditions for women to stay in the job. And that's why the turnover rate is so high among female rangers. The working conditions are not there. You are not also training rangers on how to behave when you have a female colleague within the ranger workforce. So there are few examples, but I think on the gender part, we have to do a lot. And I think we need to also encourage. So it has to be done at sort of, I would say, also like another layer, three levels. One is that, of course, we need to do policy reforms.
Mm-hmm.
Second, I think we need to use the like female ranger I mentioned, and more of those rangers to encourage young girls to apply to be a ranger, because I think it should be seen as a cool profession.
Yeah.
And they should be encouraged to do that. And third, of course, we need to work on the enabling conditions to retain the rangers in the job, female rangers in the job.
Yeah. I mean, it's me talking from the outside, but it feels like there's so many aspects of being a ranger that are just kind of intrinsically rewarding in terms of, having a bigger purpose and all these different things you're doing for your community, for, just the world and nature and the environment. But then you throw in all of these poor conditions, and it's kind of sad because this is such an amazing job that I feel like so many people could be attracted to, even, so many more than already are, if they're just at least these kind of baseline standards that we're meeting. So yeah, it's good to hear that there's a lot of momentum moving in that area, and I'm curious to kind of see how these things develop.
Yeah, if I could also mention here, John, I think we have sort of taken rangers for granted. Oh, you are dedicated guys. It's a very rewarding job.
Hmm.
You guys live next to the forest and you're proud of your job and blah blah blah. All that is good. But I think at some point the rangers will start saying like, okay, enough is enough. And I think that's why it's important that we start addressing those issues now. And let me give you a very practical example here. Some of the older generation of rangers, and you might have noticed when you were making your documentary, is they were just wanted to be in the forest. They felt they were, they were thankful that they had a job, and they were just dedicated, and they were. But some of the newer generation of rangers, their expectations are more.
Hmm.
They want like they're qualified people. They are well learned. They have seen things on internet. They want, they want connectivity in the, like for example, they want to talk to their families regularly.
Hmm.
And I think, and that's why you see there has not been any studies, but through my personal observation, there is a very high turnover rate among the younger generation of ranger, because we can't just rely on the fact that okay, you are in this job means you're dedicated and you're just giving your life to it. I think we also need to start thinking of, yes, they are dedicated, but that shouldn't be the only factor. Like at the end, like the average ranger salary is $200 a month.
Yeah,
So
it's crazy.
we need to start addressing the bigger issues as well if we want again, a professionalized, well motivated, accountable and responsible and representative ranger workforce.
Yeah, and I feel like that goes for, any job, and uh,
Exactly.
the type of work I do can't really even compare to what rangers do. But as a filmmaker or creative kind of industry, I feel like there's sometimes a similar thing that happens, especially when you're starting out, where people are like, "Well, it's about the passion, and this is something that you really want to do," and it's easy to kind of get taken advantage of, or start to feel like you're being taken advantage of because you're not getting the basic pay that other people are doing. You're kind of going above and beyond and working crazy hours, and over you kind of hear these excuses. And yeah, I mean, a lot of these rangers are passionate and really do care, and this is a part of their bigger purpose. But if they don't just kind of get that decent common respect from other people and wages to be able to support their families, it's, at a certain point you just kind of hit a wall and say, what am I doing this for? I'm kind of destroying myself and my own life. So it's really important to be able to bring those standards up.
Yeah. And related to this, John, and let me give you another practical example here. When we were delivering the Life on the Frontline survey, one thing that we one example that we come across was really shocking to me, because we were gathering this data, how many rangers, how many days rangers spend with their families. And some families said, when we asked the families, ranger families, they said they don't want rangers to come home. And that was really shocking to me. I just couldn't understand why. And they said, because rangers stay away in remote locations for so long that they have become sort of unsocial.
Mm.
And some of them have developed habits of alcohol and all that. So when they come home, they can't attend the social gatherings, and they just don't feel comfortable in social gatherings, and they sort of become short tempered. So it's like, it's better you don't come home. And though it was only from 2 or 3 families that we interviewed, but that again to me highlights the much bigger challenge, which is about the mental health.
Mm.
Nobody talks about the mental health of rangers. Everybody talks about the physical health.
Yeah.
And I think it is a very demanding job, not just physically, but also mentally. So we need to really look into mental health of rangers as well.
Can you go into that a little bit more? I mean, in some of the conversations I've had just for this podcast, veterinarians, rangers, you kind of realize, especially people facing the rhino poaching crisis, where it's almost like they're in a war and they just see this violence, they see the death, they're away for long hours. A lot of these men and women didn't want to be soldiers, and now they're kind of faced with that. But even just like you're saying, I mean, just being out and away from family for so long and doing a demanding job, maybe getting malaria and all these things, it's really stresses people mentally. And just talk a little bit more about what that looks like and what kind of need for, I guess, mental health services.
Yeah, I'm like, and we did some research on this, and there's a lot that needs to be done. I remember one incident where I was talking to a ranger, and I asked him what's the sort of the worst aspect of being a ranger, and he said that you have to walk on the same path next day where your colleague was killed.
Mm.
And I think of that stress level where you have to take the same patrol route where your colleague was killed, whether by an elephant or by a poacher, whatever. So I think, and there is no mechanism with most, I would say, I haven't seen any in any of these ranger employer departments to address that mental health side of it. A lot of these rangers, as we discussed, in very remote locations, away from their families, they don't have anybody to share their challenges or share their grievances, and it's just stresses them out. And I I personally think that we really need to look into not just annual health assessments, which some ranger employers have started doing, but also look into the mental health assessment. One of our research work in Pakistan shows that the maximum stress among rangers, mental stress, comes from poor relationship with communities. And you could easily understand that if you are working in a remote location surrounded by the villagers who don't necessarily like you. So it's going to stress you out. So I think it again project the other issue, which is like, rangers are saying that we can't protect the park without good relationship with the communities, but at the same time, they have not been trained on doing that.
Yeah.
So it's all are like sort of interconnected, and there's a lot that needs to be done on the mental health of rangers, and I hope we can do more on this in future. There's very limited literature available on it.
Yeah, it's so important. And, I mean, it's probably exacerbated in this situation, but it just feels like in general, worldwide, mental health is just still kind of lacking in terms of being taken seriously, which is kind of a tragedy. But yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It's definitely important. I don't know. I feel like we're talking about a lot of these challenges and kind of the tougher side of what a lot of these rangers have to deal with. But maybe you can talk to some of the more positive sides or the beautiful sides of being a ranger, and what keeps you connected to this community and so passionate about doing this work.
I think the best part of being, there's a sort of feeling of rangers being a big family, and I think that's something which I'm really proud of. I myself being a IRF member and IRF representative,
Hmm.
this is something that comes out every time we talk in the International Ranger Federation, that we all are part of one family. So I think that is something that is very positive. And also, I think there are just so many inspiring stories on the ground that we just, that keeps you motivated to continue what you are doing. And I think, to be honest, in last few years, we have made a progress. We are moving in the right direction. We are engaging with the right stakeholders. We are repositioning rangers into bigger policy arena. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to reform the ranger workforce and get the recognition that they deserve beyond, not just as a state rangers, but as the wider ranger community that represent different ethnicity, roles of rangers, and the gender and the areas they represent. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to bring the difference that we all are trying to bring collectively.
And I think the IRF and that community is really amazing. And yeah, just it'd be great to just see more and more rangers connect with that, because I think, going back to this idea of just being away from people for so long and not having that community, it's such a, I think, a blessing to be able to have a group of people you can go to and be able to, that understands where you're coming from. I don't know if there's any other ranger communities that rangers could get connected to or that you recommend.
Yeah, like one more thing that we have been working at the Universal Ranger Support Alliance, one of our partners or the founding members of the Universal Ranger Support Alliance is Force for Nature. And they have developed an exclusive sort of a social media platform for rangers, where rangers can interact with each other, can share their experience in their local language. And it's also an educational platform, so you can get trainings, you can get certificates. That's a way to sort of bring the ranger voices together and make sure that they all can learn from each other. If there is a forest fire, how do we ensure that Indian rangers can learn from the Australian rangers about forest fire experience? So this Force for Nature, I really enjoy it, and it is it's a new platform. It's a mobile application, and I'm the more and more rangers should join it. Especially it's currently it's available in Spanish, French, and English, but very soon it's going to be available in many other languages.
That's really great. How, I know you talked about supporting rangers through telling their stories, but how else can people get involved in the ranger world and help support a lot of these different initiatives? Is there any way that just kind of the average Joe can get connected to this?
Yeah, I'm like I think there are several ways. Like many organizations that are involved in supporting rangers provide volunteer opportunities to get the experience of being a ranger. IRF does provide that. Many of the URSA partners provide it. I think the two things that I feel are really important. One is we need to make people aware of this issue. Once they are aware, they can talk about it to whatever their friends and their colleagues, and then the message will reach to the right stakeholders. And it has to be beyond Ministry of Environment or whatever country we are talking about. It is the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Labor, and etc., etc. Second, this we also need to connect the general public back to the ranger work experience. And that's where I think some of this voluntary ranger program, I really like it. And I think they open up opportunities for general public to learn firsthand what rangers face and how they can help rangers.
It's interesting. I feel like most people that are connected to conservation, at least from the outside, that are maybe donating funds or volunteer occasionally, they see maybe a specific animal or reserve that they want to connect with to protect that species. But ultimately, it almost always comes down to the ranger on the front line is really where the biggest impact seems to be. So it's so great to see all of this work being done to give them a better standing internationally as a job, as a profession, just as being more integrated into this kind of holistic picture of how we make this a better world. Are there any questions that you wish people would ask you that seems to just never come across? Is there anything that you're like, I wish more people would ask me this question?
I won't say the question, but I think it's related to the last question. Is like, when people go on like, oh, I want to see big fives, or I want to see tigers in the wild. and they go on a safari, enjoy beautiful wildlife. But I think they forget that every single tiger sighting or every single rhino sighting, there are people who are dedicating their lives to it. They're sacrificing not just them, actually, their families also. They're sacrificing a lot to make sure that when we travel there and enjoy these wild places exist because of rangers. I just wish that people understand that connection, and it is so important that if they, without understanding that, I just feel that we won't be able to get the support we are looking for rangers.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit to your current position at WWF? Maybe give us your title and kind of your day-to-day role. What are you doing currently?
So I'm Director of Wildlife Enforcement in Zero Poaching. And in short, what I do is coordinate WWF work with regard to wildlife protection support activities across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And my day-to-day job is actually, while the pandemic time is a lot of Zoom,
Yeah, I
but
can imagine.
before pandemic, it was a lot around, going to the places and talking with our field teams. And again, WWF field teams are amazing and interacting with rangers. I used to spend 10 days a month in the field, traveling to different places. I hope that can restart this year. But yeah, a lot of coordination. I also, I'm on the steering committee member for the Universal Ranger Support Alliance. So dealing a lot with those policy discussions that we discussed at the in the beginning of this conversation, with International Labor Organization, World Health Organizations, UN agencies, etc., on how do we reform the ranger workforce and how do we get rangers into those discussions. So that's a lot, that takes up a lot of my time.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Keeping busy for sure. And yeah, just for people that are listening, this is like we're now at 5:11 a.m. your time, so you get up pretty early to start your days.
Yeah, like that's 4 a.m. That's when has been my habit. So uh, the hard part is, like, if you want me after 10 p.m., then it becomes hard.
Yeah, exactly. You're gone at that point. Yeah, thank you so much, Rohit. I don't know if there's any final words you'd like to share with the audience, maybe just kind of your outlook on the future or anything else you'd like to leave us with.
If I could end this with few lines that a ranger shared with me, and that sort of summarizes the challenges rangers are facing. And these are: we, the willing, led by the unknowing, are doing the ungrateful. We have been doing so much with so little for so long. Now we are capable of doing anything with nothing forever. That's what rangers are.
Wow. That's pretty powerful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Rohit.
Thanks a lot, John.
Really appreciate you coming on and spending this time with us.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you for listening to the Rhino Man podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you're excited to see the film succeed, please subscribe and review our podcast on Spotify and iTunes. Then follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Rhino Man the Movie. More details about Rhino Man, the social impact campaign, and future screenings are at rhinomanthemovie.org. To learn more about the Global Conservation Corps and their work, visit globalconservationcorps.org. Sign up for the newsletter and follow GCC on all of the social platforms. If you like this podcast, make sure to subscribe and catch up on GCC's Voices of Nature podcast, where Bob Ludke interviews a wide range of people who have dedicated their lives to making a difference in conservation. A special thanks goes out to Simone Wilson for the music for this podcast. He's the brilliant composer for Rhino Man the Movie. Learn more about his work at simonewilsonmusic.com. Until next time, I'm John Jerko, and this is the Rhino Man Podcast.